The stage lights burned bright, cameras locked in, and the audience leaned forward in anticipation. The debate had already been heated, but no one was prepared for what came next. Candace Owens' voice, sharpened like a blade, suddenly erupted. She leaned across her podium, eyes blazing, and screamed so loudly that even the microphones crackled under the force of her words. The room gasped. Gasps echoed across the auditorium, phones shot into the air, recording every second, and the tension became so thick you could almost feel it pressing against your skin, then freeze. Right there. Candace's face twisted mid-scream, her voice echoing into silence as the video cuts to slow motion. But what came next, the narrator whispers, silenced the entire stage. The crowd didn't yet know it, but history was about to unfold in front of them. The clash of two worlds, one driven by fury, the other by calm, was about to leave an unforgettable mark on the conversation of the nation. The kind of moment that people would replay on social media for weeks, dissecting every second, every gesture, every word. The stage itself looked more like a battlefield than a debate platform. Spotlights glared like interrogation lamps, exposing every twitch of the contestants. The air buzzed with the faint hum of cameras streaming to millions of homes across the country. You could almost hear the nation holding its breath, waiting for anyone to break the silence. But before we move next, hit the subscribe button and press that bell icon for more hot and trending updates. Because I know most of you just watched the video and don't subscribe to the channel. And what came next? It wasn't another scream. It wasn't another insult. It was something far more powerful, so unexpected that even Candace herself would freeze in place, stunned into silence, because sometimes the loudest voice in the room isn't the strongest. Sometimes the quietest, calmest response can land like a thunderclap. You've never seen a comeback delivered this way before. And that's exactly why this moment, this single exchange, would soon explode across every feed, every timeline, and every living room in America. This wasn't just another debate. It was bigger than two names on a stage, bigger than two voices competing for sound bites. What unfolded under those blinding lights was a reflection of America itself, a raw, unfiltered mirror showing the fractures of race, gender, and values colliding in real time. When Candace Owens raised her voice, she wasn't just shouting at Jasmine Crockett, she was shouting into an America already divided, already scarred, already desperate for clarity. Every scream echoed the wider tension simmering across the nation. And that's exactly why this confrontation mattered so much. Owens stepped into the spotlight like a performer on center stage, fueled not by calm logic but by theatrical aggression. Her words weren't measured, they were weapons flung with precision and fury, designed to overwhelm rather than persuade. She thrived on spectacle, on rattling her opponents, on hijacking the narrative with sheer volume. To her, debates weren't about truth, they were about dominance. And in that moment, she believed volume equaled victory, but across from her stood Jasmine Crockett, a different kind of presence altogether. She wasn't playing for the camera. She wasn't chasing applause. Lines. She carried herself like someone who had been here before, someone who knew storms pass, but calm endures. While Owens raged, Crockett stood rooted, her composure a quiet but undeniable force. The louder her opponent became, the more Jasmine's stillness drew the eyes of the audience. It was a paradox unfolding live. The more Owens demanded attention, the more attention slipped away from her and toward the woman who refused to be rattled. The entire nation had tuned in with one expectation: fireworks. They wanted sparks, clashes, chaos, the kind of viral moments that dominate feeds within minutes. Social media was already primed. Hashtags waiting to be born, clips ready to be clipped. Millions watched live, while millions more hovered on standby, waiting for the internet to deliver them the highlight reel. Everyone knew something explosive was coming. They just didn't know it wouldn't come from the person screaming the loudest. Because the truth was, Owens wasn't just battling Crockett. She was battling the perception of herself and image, of arrogance, hostility, and performative anger. Every second she spent raising her voice made that image sharper, clearer, harder to deny. And Crockett, without even lifting her voice, let Owens carve her own downfall. The real power wasn't in shouting. It was in restraint, it was in patience, it was in timing. The atmosphere in the hall thickened with anticipation. The audience could sense a shift, but couldn't name it yet. On the surface, Owens appeared to be winning the moment her voice was louder, her energy higher, her presence demanding. But beneath the surface, something more subtle, more devastating was building. Crockett wasn't just surviving the storm, she was quietly positioning herself for the counterstrike. And that's the irony that made this moment unforgettable. The very outburst Owens believed would solidify her dominance instead exposed her weakness. She had played her biggest card too early, leaving the door wide open for a reply no one saw coming, but Owens had no idea that her loudest attack would set up her quietest defeat. Candace Owens did not emerge from nowhere. She crafted herself into a brand, one built on sharp edges and louder-than-life pronouncements. In the early days, she was seen as a fresh voice willing to cut through the noise. But as time passed, that voice grew harsher, sharper, and far more calculated. She didn't just step into debates, she stormed into them, treating every exchange like a battlefield where scorched earth was the only acceptable outcome. For her, controversy wasn't an accident, it was currency. Every outrage became a headline. Every clash a stepping stone toward building her persona as the unapologetic disruptor. Her reputation grew quickly, not because she spoke with nuance, but because she spoke with ferocity. She mastered the art of the viral insult, the barbed remark that could fit neatly into a 20-second clip designed to trend. She wielded confrontation like a spotlight, pulling attention toward herself even when the substance of her argument faltered. Theatrics became her armor, aggression her weapon. And as the years rolled on, her style hardened into something unmistakable, sharp, cutting, and often merciless. With every stage she stepped onto, Owens brought the same approach: speak louder, cut deeper, leave the opponent scrambling. She thrived on pressure, but not by absorbing it. She thrived by transferring it, forcing others into defensive positions before they could make their case. This strategy worked, at least for a time. Crowds cheered her takedowns, commentators replayed her zingers, and supporters hailed her as fearless. But beneath the surface, a different picture was forming, a picture of someone who confused domination with dialogue, and volume with victory. The contradiction at the heart of her persona became impossible to ignore. She spoke constantly of defending free speech, of allowing voices to be heard without fear of censorship. Yet in debate after debate, she employed the very tactics that silenced others. She cut them off mid-sentence, drowned them out with shouting, and mocked them into retreat. It wasn't about giving all voices a chance. It was about ensuring hers was the only one that mattered. In the name of freedom, she exercised control. In the name of truth, she often delivered spectacle. This contradiction didn't weaken her standing with her followers. In fact, it only emboldened her. The more abrasive she became, the more loyalty she commanded from those who mistook aggression for strength. But for her critics and for neutral audiences, the cracks were widening. They saw arrogance in her tone, overconfidence in her posture, and a steady disregard for respectful dialogue. She wasn't just debating, she was belittling. She wasn't persuading, she was performing. And as her reputation grew, so too did the frustration of those who longed for something more meaningful than sound bites and screams. To understand the weight of what happened on that stage, you have to understand the aura she carried into it. Owens walked in believing she had already won. She had beaten countless opponents into silence before. Why would this night be any different? The swagger, the smirk, the confidence in her stride, it all pointed to the same belief. Her words would be too sharp, her voice too loud, her tactics too overwhelming for anyone to withstand. She carried herself not just as a debater, but as a conqueror striding into familiar territory, and that, more than anything, became her downfall. Overconfidence has a way of blinding even the sharpest minds. Owens believed her theatrics would once again leave her opponent rattled, scrambling for words, desperate to defend themselves. She assumed volume would drown out reason and insult would overshadow calm. What she never accounted for was the possibility of someone who wouldn't bite, wouldn't flinch, and wouldn't break. Her backstory is important not because it excuses her behavior, but because it sets the stage for why her defeat in this moment carried so much weight. This wasn't just another opponent caught in the storm. This was Jasmine Crockett, and she was built for storms. For Owens, the same tactics that had lifted her onto platforms and carved her brand now exposed her weakness. Arrogance can only last so long before it collides with composure, and when it does, arrogance shatters. So when Owens screamed across that stage, it wasn't just a moment of aggression. It was years of cultivated bravado culminating in one desperate outburst. A career's worth of insult-driven tactics compressed into a single eruption. She believed it would secure her dominance. Instead, it set the perfect stage for a quiet, devastating reply that would flip the script entirely. The villain's story always begins with power. But it's how that power unravels that audiences remember most. And Owens, in her arrogance, had just set up the moment that would haunt her, the moment when volume finally met its match in calm. Jasmine Crockett didn't step onto that stage by accident. Her journey was carved out of grit, discipline, and a relentless belief in justice. Long before the cameras found her, long before millions knew her name, she was a fighter not with fists or fury, but with the law, with advocacy, and with the unshakable conviction that fairness mattered more than fame. She trained as a lawyer, entering a field where sharp minds and steady nerves collide daily, and in that crucible she learned something priceless. True power isn't about shouting the loudest. True power comes from staying grounded when the storm is raging. Her path was never smooth. Crockett faced obstacles that could have broken others' financial struggles, systemic barriers, endless critics. Yet every time she found a way to push through. She didn't have the luxury of arrogance. She had to earn her space in every room she entered, often working twice as hard just to be recognized as equal. And in those battles, she discovered a truth that would shape her forever. Composure isn't silence, and calm isn't surrender. Calm, in the right hands, becomes a weapon sharper than any insult. As a lawyer, Crockett stood across from hostile prosecutors and skeptical judges. She faced down the glare of authority figures determined to dismiss her, waiting for her to crack. But she didn't. She argued with precision, with control, with dignity. Every client who watched her speak saw the same thing, the quiet fire of someone who refused to back down. In courtrooms where emotions often ran high, Crockett mastered the art of cooling the temperature while still delivering blows that landed with undeniable weight. These experiences didn't just build her resume, they hardened her resolve, teaching her how to thrive when the stakes were highest. Her transition into public service wasn't a leap of ambition, but a continuation of her calling. She had spent years advocating for people who didn't have a voice, standing up in spaces where power often drowned out truth. Moving into politics was simply another battlefield, one where the stakes expanded from individual clients to entire communities. In Congress, Crockett became known not for theatrics, but for integrity. Her colleagues saw her as steady, principled, unwilling to be bullied into silence. And while she wasn't always the loudest voice in the room, she was often the one people remembered. Values anchored her journey: fairness, justice, integrity. They weren't slogans for her. They were the compass by which she navigated hostile territory. In a world where so many rise by tearing others down, Crockett rose by lifting others up. Her belief wasn't in winning for the sake of victory, but in proving that dignity itself could be victorious. Each challenge she faced only refined that belief. Each confrontation only tested it further. It wasn't just her professional path that shaped her, it was the struggles she endured personally. Crockett faced moments of doubt, times when doors slammed shut, when her efforts seemed invisible. She knew what it felt like to be underestimated, dismissed, ignored. But those very moments hardened her will. Where others might have given up, she sharpened her skills, waiting for the moment she would stand before not just an audience, but a nation, and prove that resilience speaks louder than rage. That's why, when she stood opposite Candace Owens on that stage, she wasn't rattled. She had lived through worse storms. She had stood before louder critics, harsher opponents, more hostile environments. What Owens saw as intimidation, Crockett recognized. as opportunity. Where Owens leaned on volume, Crockett leaned on discipline. The years of being underestimated had taught her patience. And patience is lethal in the right moment. Her calm wasn't weakness. It was a weapon sharpened by years of discipline. Every courtroom, every congressional chamber, every hostile encounter had been training for this. Every attempt to silence her had only made her more resilient. Owens may have had the spotlight, but Crockett had the substance. Owens may have had the theatrics, but Crockett had the truth. And when those two forces collide, performance versus principle, it is only a matter of time before the mask slips. And the audience sees who truly commands the moment. The empathy Crockett inspired wasn't just from her calm presence, but from the fact that she represented so many who had felt the same struggles, being underestimated, being dismissed, being shouted over. She carried their experiences with her, and in every reply, in every pause, in every carefully chosen word, she spoke not just for herself, but for them. So when the lights burned hot and Owens's voice rose to a scream, Crockett didn't flinch. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life. What looked like restraint was strategy. What looked like patience was precision. And when her reply finally came, it wasn't simply her words that stunned the crowd. It was the entire weight of her journey crashing into that single instant. Because sometimes the most powerful punch is the one delivered with absolute calm. And Jasmine Crockett knew exactly when and how to deliver it. The air in the room had shifted. What began as spirited back and forth was quickly unraveling into a spectacle dominated by Candace Owens's booming voice. She leaned further across her podium, eyes flashing, hands slicing through the air with every word. Her tone rose, climbing higher with each sentence, until her speech became less about points and more about sheer force. She was animated, pacing the stage, her voice ricocheting off the walls, demanding not just attention but submission. Every gesture seemed calculated to overwhelm. She jabbed her finger toward Jasmine Crockett, slammed her palm on the podium, and let her sentences stretch into long tirades. Her words weren't landing like thoughtful arguments, they were missiles of frustration, launched one after another, hoping sheer volume would drown out any response. The more she shouted, the more convinced she seemed that victory was already hers. But across from her, Jasmine Crockett was still. Not frozen, not intimidated, still. Her hands rested lightly on her podium, her eyes steady, her body language radiating composure. She blinked slowly as Owens raged, as if reminding herself and everyone watching that storms eventually pass. The contrast could not have been sharper. On one side, theatrics; on the other, unshakable calm. And it was that calm, not the chaos, that began to draw the audience in. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some leaned forward in discomfort, unsure of what would happen if the shouting continued unchecked. Others whispered to one another, pointing toward Crockett's serene posture, marveling at how she refused to be pulled into the whirlwind. The cameras caught every angle, the sweat forming on Owens's forehead, the fire in her gestures, and then cutting away, the stillness of Crockett, who seemed to command the stage without even moving. The tension was now a living thing. It crackled through the air, bouncing between the audience, the stage, and the millions watching online. Commentators backstage exchanged glances, sensing the makings of a viral moment. Social media feeds were already exploding. Owens screaming. Crockett not budging. Is she going to respond? The anticipation built second by second, every viewer holding their breath for what would come next. And that anticipation began to betray Owens. The more she escalated, the more desperate it seemed. Her words blurred into noise, her shouts less persuasive and more performative. What had started as dominance now looked like loss of control. Every decibel she added to her voice only made Crockett's silence more powerful, more commanding. It was as if the debate had flipped without anyone saying a word. Owens sensed it too. Her voice cracked slightly as she reached her crescendo, a fleeting sign that the energy she poured into her assault was burning fast. She had thrown everything into the storm, leaving nothing in reserve. The insults peaked, sharp and cutting, but no longer surprising. The audience, once rattled, was now watching with curiosity rather than shock. They weren't asking if Crockett would reply, they were asking when, and then it happened. The room filled with Owens's noise just seconds before suddenly hushed. Owens paused for breath, her tirade stretched thin. The silence was deafening, and every eye in the auditorium shifted toward Jasmine Crockett. She leaned in ever so slightly, her lips parting, her gaze locked, not on the cameras, not on the audience, but directly on her opponent. The crowd froze. The cameras zoomed in, and in that instant the balance of power shifted entirely. And then, just as the insults peaked, Crockett leaned in with a reply no one expected. The room had gone silent. A silence so heavy it pressed down on every seat, every breath, every heartbeat in the hall. Candace Owens's tirade had burned itself out, her voice fraying on the edges, her energy spent in a storm of volume. And there, across from her, stood Jasmine Crockett still, poised, waiting. She let the silence stretch, let it echo, let the anticipation climb to unbearable heights. Every second felt like an eternity. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the intensity in her eyes. The audience leaned forward, holding their breath, waiting. For something, anything. Owens fidgeted slightly, perhaps realizing she had left herself exposed. And then Crockett moved. She leaned in, not aggressively, but with the grace of someone who knew exactly what she was about to do. Her voice, when it finally came, was the opposite of Owens's. It was low, calm, deliberate. A single sentence slipped from her lips with the weight of a gavel striking in a courtroom. The effect was immediate. Gasps rippled through the crowd, the kind of involuntary reaction that sweeps across a room when everyone knows they've just witnessed something historic. Owens blinked, stunned, her mouth opening but no words forming. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her composure spoke louder than any shout ever could. She let the words land, let them sit in the air, unchallenged, undeniable. The contrast was devastating. One woman had screamed herself hoarse, while the other needed only a handful of measured syllables to own the stage. And it wasn't just the words themselves, it was the way Crockett delivered them. Each pause was calculated, each look purposeful. She embodied control. The silence after her lines wasn't awkward, it was powerful. The audience, stunned into stillness, erupted a beat later in applause that rattled the rafters. Some stood to their feet, cheering, clapping, unable to contain the surge of energy her calm reply had ignited. On social media, the explosion was instant. Clips of the moment hit Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram within seconds. Captions appeared. "This is what leadership looks like. Calm greater than chaos." Owens didn't see this coming. Hashtags trended before the debate even ended. Memes sprang up overnight. Side-by-side photos of Owens mid-scream and Crockett mid-smile, captioned with a simple "Truth, dignity defeats rage." Meanwhile, Owens unraveled before the cameras. The once commanding voice now faltered. Her hands twitched as she tried to regroup, but the audience wasn't with her anymore. They had turned. The energy in the room belonged to Crockett. Even those who had cheered Owens earlier were now silent, some shaking their heads, others whispering, "She lost it." Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't smile smugly or revel in Owens's unraveling. That was the brilliance of her approach. She stayed composed, dignified, as though she had expected this all along. She delivered her words, absorbed the applause, and then returned to silence, letting the moment speak for itself. It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a masterclass in restraint, a living example of how calm dismantles chaos. Audience members later recalled the exact second they felt the tide turn. One said, "I realized then that Owens was loud, but Crockett was strong." Another whispered to a friend, "This is why people like her are in Congress." The imagined voices of millions echoed the same sentiment. This is what leadership looks like. The contrast was cinematic. On one side, Owens, rattled, scrambling for her footing, her overconfidence stripped away in real time. On the other, Crockett, unmoved, anchored in dignity, her calm reply reverberating like thunder long after the words left her mouth. It was the turning point everyone had been waiting for, the kind of moment that transcends politics and becomes legend. Journalists covering the debate scribbled furiously, knowing the headline had just written itself. Commentators backstage mouthed to each other, "She owned that." And the cameras kept rolling, capturing every angle of Owens's shaken expression and Crockett's composed demeanor. The crowd could sense it too. The debate had effectively ended, even if the clock hadn't, because this wasn't just a reply, it was a takedown without ever raising a voice. Crockett's calm had done what Owens's fury could not. It had commanded respect, united the audience, and shifted the balance of power with surgical precision. Owens tried to recover, tried to launch another attack, but it was too late. The energy had shifted. The room no longer belonged to her. Each attempt she made to claw back control only highlighted the emptiness of her earlier screams. Crockett had flipped the narrative entirely. The hero had emerged not by shouting down her opponent, but by standing taller in silence, and in that moment, the lesson became clear to everyone watching. Volume may capture attention, but dignity keeps it. Rage may create noise, but composure creates history. As the applause swelled and the hashtag spread, it was undeniable. The debate had its climax, its cinematic turning point. The villain had unraveled, the hero had risen, and the audience had witnessed something unforgettable. Candace Owens had believed her loudest moment would cement her dominance. Instead, it became the setup for Jasmine Crockett's quietest, most devastating victory. The debate may have ended on stage, but its true explosion happened online. Within minutes of Jasmine Crockett's calm reply, the clip had been uploaded, shared, and replayed millions of times. Twitter lit up like a storm. Hashtags began trending globally. Hashtag Crockett calm, hashtag dignity defeats rage, and hashtag Owens meltdown. TikTok. Users spliced the moment into remixes, looping the exact second Owens fell silent as Crockett's words cut through. Instagram flooded with memes. Owens' mid-yell juxtaposed with Crockett's composed stare, captioned with lines like, "This is strength, and leadership isn't loud, it's clear." Influencers quickly joined the chorus. Political commentators posted threads breaking down the debate second by second, highlighting how Crockett's composure flipped the narrative. Lifestyle creators who rarely touch politics shared the clip, calling it a masterclass in grace under pressure. Even comedians jumped in, parodying Owens's meltdown by shouting into cameras before cutting abruptly to Crockett's serene face. The internet had spoken, and it wasn't subtle. Jasmine Crockett had won not just the debate, but the cultural moment. Mainstream media amplified the firestorm. Morning talk shows replayed the exchange, hosts marveling at Crockett's ability to turn silence into power. Headlines blared across outlets. Crockett's calm reply silences Owens. Owens screams, Crockett leads. Some framed it as a generational divide, others as a symbol of women in leadership, but all agreed on one thing: Crockett's dignity stole the show. The footage looped endlessly on cable news, commentators praising her presence while noting Owens's loss of control. And Owens, she tried to respond. At first, she laughed awkwardly, forcing a smirk as if to dismiss the moment. But the cameras caught her shifting posture, the tightness in her jaw, the frustration simmering behind her eyes. Later, on social media, she attempted a defensive follow-up, accusing Crockett of being rehearsed or weak, yet the words landed flat. Every reply under her post was the same: "You lost it. Crockett handled you. Volume isn't victory." Owens had built her brand on commanding attention, but in this moment, that attention had become a spotlight exposing her unraveling. For Crockett, the validation poured in like a tidal wave. Supporters flooded her pages with praise, calling her, "Reply the future of leadership." Some wrote, "This is what we want our kids to see." Others admitted they didn't follow politics closely, but this moment made them take notice. The ripple effect wasn't just about one debate, it was about reshaping what audiences admired in public discourse. Crockett's calm had redefined strength, reminding millions that dignity could, in fact, win. Even celebrities outside of politics joined in. Musicians, actors, athletes, figures who usually stayed quiet about debates shared the clip, often with a single line: "Respect." One tweet from a major Hollywood star read, "She didn't raise her voice. She raised the bar. It was retweeted hundreds of thousands of times, cementing the sentiment across cultural boundaries. The satisfaction among viewers was palpable. People who had grown weary of endless shouting matches saw in Crockett a refreshing alternative. Instead of another screaming headline, they witnessed a steady hand in chaos. Instead of more noise, they found clarity. It wasn't just about who won a debate, it was about who restored their faith in how leaders should carry themselves. The emotional validation was so strong that the clip wasn't just trending for hours, it was trending for days, carried forward by the collective hunger for something dignified. And while Owens scrambled to salvage her narrative, the damage was already done. Her meltdown had become part of her public identity, replayed in GIFs, memes, and late-night monologues. Every scream, every wild gesture was now frozen forever as a reminder of the night she lost control. The more she tried to deny it, the more the internet reminded her, Crockett didn't beat you with volume, she beat you with presence. But this moment was more than just entertainment, more than just a viral clip. Audiences around the world felt something deeper stir inside them. In the age of outrage, where shouting often drowns out sense, Crockett had proven that calm could be revolutionary. She had reminded people of something almost forgotten, that dignity still carries weight, that leadership can be quiet, and that true strength doesn't need to scream. And that's why, even as the applause faded and the debate hall emptied, the impact lingered. Because this was bigger than one confrontation, bigger than one rivalry. It was a mirror held up to society, showing us not just who shouted, but who truly led. But this was bigger than one debate. It was a reminder of something we've nearly forgotten. In the end, this moment wasn't just about Candace Owens versus Jasmine Crockett. It wasn't just another clash on stage, another viral clip tossed into the endless cycle of outrage. What we witnessed was something bigger, something timeless. It was a reminder that calm defeats chaos, that dignity can silence insult, and that true strength is measured not in how loud we shout, but in how steady we stand. Crockett's reply was more than words, it was wisdom in action. She showed that leadership doesn't need to roar to be heard. It doesn't need to dominate the room with theatrics or volume. Real leadership is composure under fire, the ability to face insult and aggression without lowering oneself to the same level. She reminded us all that character speaks louder than noise, and that silence, when used with precision, can thunder louder than the most furious scream. This wasn't about winning a single debate, it was about setting an example. Millions who watched saw themselves in Crockett's calm, the student being shouted over in class, the worker dismissed in a meeting, the parent teaching their child to stand tall in the face of disrespect. Crockett carried all of them in that moment, proving that dignity is not weakness. It's the sharpest weapon of all. And in a time when America feels fractured by rage, division, and endless shouting, her composure carried something profoundly patriotic. It echoed values we claim as our foundation: justice, resilience, unity. The belief that strength isn't found in tearing others down, but in lifting the standard higher. She reminded us that America's story has always been written not by the loudest voices, but by the voices that endure, that speak with clarity, with patience, with purpose. The lesson stretched far beyond politics. It spoke to our daily lives. We live in an age where volume often wins the algorithm, where insults dominate headlines, and where outrage feels like currency, but Crockett's reply cut through all of it. She proved that composure, though quieter, leaves the deeper mark. That when the noise fades, it is dignity that remains. Audience members walked away inspired not just by what she said, but by how she said it. The internet didn't celebrate a clever one-liner or a brutal insult, it celebrated restraint, clarity, calm. The kind of strength that doesn't just win a round, but restores faith in what leadership could and should look like. And perhaps that's why the clip spread so far. Why hashtags kept trending, why people from every walk of life reposted it with pride. Because in Crockett's calm, people didn't just see a political figure. They saw the America they wanted to believe, and an America where justice carries more weight than mockery, where unity stands taller than division, And where dignity is still a winning strategy, this moment gave people something they've been starved for: hope. Hope that the screaming doesn't always win. Hope that composure still matters. Hope that leadership can be measured not in noise but in wisdom. Candace Owens screamed, but it was Jasmine Crockett's silence that spoke to the soul of the nation, and so the moral of that night, etched into memory, is this: rage fades but dignity lasts. Chaos may shake the stage, but composure steadies it. In the clash between arrogance and integrity, integrity wins every time. That's not just a lesson for one debate, it's a lesson for us all. Candace Owens screamed. Jasmine Crockett stunned. That's the story that played out on stage, and it's the story now etched into the minds of everyone who witnessed it. One woman unleashed a storm of noise. The other stood firm, calm, unshaken, and with just a few measured words, she silenced the chaos and claimed the moment. This debate wasn't about who could shout the loudest. It wasn't about who could land the nastiest insult. It was about something deeper, something bigger. It was about the reminder that dignity is power, that calm is strength, and that composure, even in the loudest storm, can reshape the narrative. Crockett showed us that true leadership doesn't scream, it stands. And in standing, it inspires. If this moment hit you the way it hit millions of others, if you felt that spark of pride, that sense of hope that dignity still has a place in public life, then you're in the right place. Because this channel isn't just about politics. It's about truth over noise, integrity over insults, and community over chaos. So before you click away, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell icon. Not just to keep up with the latest hot and trending updates, but to be part of a movement. Community that values composure over chaos and clarity over confusion. And if you believe more people need to see moments like this, share this video. Let it be a reminder that calm still wins, that dignity still matters, and that leadership still exists. Candace Owens screamed. Jasmine Crockett stunned. And in the end, dignity won.